What does this have to mean? The example of this would be the fact that I have what's called the cap, a very large, thick ice cap towards one end of this continent. So, does that mean that this world's environment is radically different than ours? Or does that mean, based on where this is and the orientation of how I drew it and wrote it, does that mean that this continent is actually in the southern hemisphere of this world? If you believe in plate tectonics and moving continents, what have you, throughout history, you would know that ice has been in various places around the world over time as the continents have moved, drifted, weather patterns have changed. So it's not necessarily true that this continent has to be further to the southern hemisphere, but it's the easiest to conceptualize because that's what we're used to in our world. Now, something I did do that's somewhat interesting, there's a very large desert just above this ice cap. So now where does that mean in our world? You will find the largest deserts around the world at about the same longitudinal line. It might be latitude. And it has to do with the tilt of the Earth, and it has to do with warm air rising off of the equator and the line at which that air drops. As air sinks, it heats, it dries. You get deserts in those locations pretty much invariably. So what does it mean that there's a large desert in this world? Does that represent a tilt of this world? Does that represent where the warm air drops from this world? So still figuring out what that means. Completely opposite on the continent, there is a very large forest, a belt of green that stretches across the entire continent. So this continent was mostly drawn with the idea of my campaign will probably never really leave this meteor lake, but maybe my players have questions. I want them to be able to ask questions about this world, about where people are from, and get answers that go, oh, I wonder what's over there. So I want to have some idea what's over there. Unfortunately, this campaign almost fell apart. Several players won't be making it any longer, so I need to introduce new characters in a large group, actually. So this spurred me. There is an area on this continent that I just sort of marked off, lost lands. There's something over there, don't know what's over there. No one goes that way. Well, through means, my characters are going to find themselves in trouble in this location, and they don't know how they got there, really. So I will sort of wrap up the idea of the homebrew campaign there. It can start very small. A lake and a town. And from a lake and a town, I had islands on a lake, a massive lake, and 4 kingdoms. And from a lake, towns, and kingdoms, I had mountains and rivers and forests and deserts and a continent, oceans, and a world. I haven't decided the name for the world yet, but the name of my homebrew continent is Fotath. Kind of cool. Something else that is very useful when you're running a game, be it homebrew or otherwise, is to have a notebook for your game. Let's see if I picked up the right notebook. I did, in fact. Literally, Tuesday Newbies. I tried to write down several of the basic ideas, names of characters, both the players and the non-players, which are known as NPCs, non-player characters. And I try to keep a running log. Most of that I've actually switched over to the phone itself. I use OneNote. It's really useful. I think I've only skimmed the surface of its functionality, as I'm not very technologically inclined. But I think it's really great and useful for keeping separate documents on your different campaigns. As I have 3 campaigns, I need a lot of documents. So that's the fully homebrew world. Now, I will attempt to keep this video to an hour or less. We'll see how that goes. I meander and wonder. Let's talk about kind of in between the two. This world is in the Forgotten Realms. This is the world of Abir Toril. It is the Sword Coast, which is one of the most famous locations in D&D at this point, as so many books have been written about it. There's so much history and lore for the Forgotten Realm, for the Sword Coast, and that region specifically now. So this campaign, I started before my newbie campaign. This campaign started late January, early February, and it's one that is also currently running. And I run this one Friday night. This is, many of those who know me, I've talked about this campaign. This is my big campaign. This campaign can vary in size from as little as 7 people to as many as 13. 13 is a challenge. So this one I did set in the Forgotten Realms. This one I did set in the Sword Coast, and specifically in maybe the most famous city of the Sword Coast, Waterdeep. This is, I believe, the biggest city by population in the Sword Coast, or at least one of the top 3. And it definitely has the most clout. It also has a very storied history, obviously, from humble beginnings to the metropolis it is now. One of the most unique and defining characteristics of Waterdeep is it has what's known as the ward system. And much like New York has boroughs, you have sectionalized areas of the city for different purposes. There's at least 6 different wards for Waterdeep. And this campaign, while taking the premise and the basis of a pre-existing world, I decided that, well, I don't want to feel fully obligated to follow the lore and the legends. I want to use them, but I don't want to be too constrained by them. So what I did is, I did some reading. I did reading on Waterdeep. I bought, and this is something that is not 100% necessary, but I think is very useful when you run a campaign that is based on an area or a region, or you're envisioning something that is probably based on an area or a region that there's a book about. I bought the book. Though this book is older, from the, let's say, early 90s. When I say older, I mean in terms of time scale of this city. It informed me a lot about the history of Waterdeep, the people, the important people. It helped educate me on the lords of Waterdeep, which are quite fascinating. And just some of the struggles and the strifes that have occurred within the city. So I don't have to follow all of these, but I can utilize what I think is most interesting and useful to me and my goals in this campaign, and reflect those more greatly. And I can drop other things. And then another book that was more recently produced, Sword Coast Adventures Guide, all about the Sword Coast. And this went to a lot of the legends and lores of the Sword Coast, and this helped me find a protagonist for my campaign. Antagonist, should I say. So I knew I wanted to start in Waterdeep, and I wanted Waterdeep to be under attack. Oh, there's a really big dragon that lives maybe 100 miles off the coast. Ah, that's a red dragon. And in D&D, red dragons, which I think is probably what people most envision when they think of dragons, is red dragons, actually. Red dragons are your prototypical hoarders. They are, as hoarders go, they are the hoarders of hoarders when it comes to dragons. They are the most arrogant. They are the most concerned with wealth and having more than others. And also more than any other dragon, they want to be worshipped as gods. They are egomaniacs. They really are. It's great. So think Smaug. So, oh, there's a really huge dragon, maybe 100 miles or so away from here, which in this day and age is a long distance, mind you. Many days travel. And it's been terrorizing this small community of islands and demanding fealty from them. Well, what if it felt like, these are small fries. I can do better. I am better. I deserve more. So I had this dragon actually attack and conquer Waterdeep. So this campaign starts with our heroes in a dungeon. Worse than a dungeon, actually. This campaign is a dungeon. Different sense of a dungeon. In D&D, in the real world, when we say dungeon, you mean in shackles, imprisoned. While that's true for what was happening to the characters, when I say dungeon, I mean a subterranean location that can be explored. My players started shackled, imprisoned, enslaved, in what is also very famous for this area, Mount Waterdeep. It is where the town of Waterdeep gets its name from. One of the two places it gets its name from. So they are imprisoned. They are doing hard labor, chain gang and all. And the adventure sort of stems from here. It's how they meet each other. I had over 2 years of time go by in game that they were captured, imprisoned, mistreated, tortured. Less torture, but more mistreatment. They worked and slaved away. They saw other prisoners be beaten and died during this time. And they got to know each other a little bit over this time. They made certain connections to help sort of generate the party. And from there, I gave them a chance to escape. They ended up indebted to a secret criminal group who helped break them out and then expected them to work for them. And the campaign sort of started growing from there. I spent a lot of time, a lot of mental energy, and some time in game really depicting how severely and truly depressing this place was. When the group finally gets out of Mount Waterdeep, with bare bones equipment and working for this criminal organization, they emerge into the sewers, and then they emerge for the first time for the characters in 2 years into day. It's not really daylight. In the time that Hondour, the name of the Red Dragon who has conquered Waterdeep, has controlled Waterdeep, it seems that his presence has actually caused the mountain to become an active volcano. It now constantly spews ash and smoke into the air. So much so that the sun is completely blotted out from Waterdeep and the surrounding area. As the first party member lifts the manhole cover from over their head, it is an ashy gray sky. As far as you can see, you see no light. You don't even know what time of day it is. You assume it's day, it's not dark, but it could be noon and you wouldn't know it because it looks more like dusk. There's mounds of ash built up along the sides of the roads. It's hard to breathe. You start choking almost immediately. It smells sulfurous. And in hindsight, I probably should have made my characters make Constitution saving throws to see if they were hardy enough to not have any ill effects of breathing ash for so long. Missed opportunity. But I definitely invested energy in making it very clear that this city, which is known as the City of Splendors, is now somewhat whimsically but very truthfully called the Splendorless City. There is no joy, there is no hope, there is no light. Things were dark. They were crumbling. There was despair. Only the very wealthy who were left and criminal organizations really had any influence left in the city. I destroyed Hondour and his forces, destroyed most of the religious institutions in the city, dethroned all, or most, of the Lords of Waterdeep to assert and insert himself as the ruler. And in the adventures that happened in the city, the most important one probably was the reaping. And this takes place every week, which in D&D worlds is often 10 days. And it is the day that Hondour and his generals come out, pomp and circumstance and all, and give the people of Waterdeep the chance to thank them for freeing them from their oppressive rulers. Again, egomaniac. And so on the day of the reaping, the party is convinced to go to see these tyrants for the first time. They've heard of them. They've heard of the Genasi war general. They've heard of the Efreeti commander. They've heard of an apparent vampire lord in control of commerce. So they've heard of these people. They've heard of these entities. They've never met them. They've never seen them. And so I had Hondour come from his mountain on high, and you hear him before you see him, and then you see this jet of flame shoot down from above the ash-covered sky and ignites all the ash. And so you have a halo of burning ash expanding outward, actually vaporizing all the ash in the area. And it was both designed to be frightening and almost a relief, because the first time you've seen the sun for these characters in over 2 years. But the first thing you see when you see the sun is this horrible blackened ash falling, which is probably even more unhealthy for you. And then this incredibly massive ancient red dragon, which sort of does the hero landing as it smashes into the ground. The ground rumbles around it. And it comes in to thank the people for being here and thank them for their fealty and their appreciation. And he's happy to have helped save them from the oppression they suffered before. And people start giving him whatever gold they found, whatever material wealth they have left. The criminal groups now have most of the material wealth left in the city. And you find that there's actually a degree of jostling for position. Oscar, what? What's wrong, Oscar? You find that it is the criminal organizations that are now jostling for power within the city based on what they can give their rulers. You know, be it to get them to look a different direction when they're committing their crimes, or to be allowed more power and influence. So, at this point, the party has seen just how powerful these individuals all look. And then it gets worse. Then the group starts being referenced. They don't know their name yet, but they start being referenced by some of the generals of Hondour. As the group had actually killed lizardmen, which were the servants, sort of the guard of the town, in an open display of rebellion against Hondour. Though that wasn't their goal, that's what it comes across as. So the group is now known to the generals. There had also been an assassination attempt made on the group. probably a day or so ago, which failed. Unfortunately for some, fortunately for the group. And now they're being talked about. Most of the citizens of Waterdeep are here in this crowd, the group interspersed among them. In disguises, of course, because they kind of thought this was possible. And now you have the most powerful and frightening individuals in the city saying, we want these men. We will give a reward for anyone who turns these men in. 1,000 gold pieces if you deliver them to us. And the group can hear whispers and murmurs in the crowd. And interestingly enough, I have my characters roll to see what they heard. Some of them hear whispers of, oh God, I could use that money, that'd be so helpful. If I know where these guys are, I'm definitely turning them in. And they heard some whispers of, they're standing up against them. We shouldn't turn these guys in. They're trying to make a difference. So they heard the tension in the crowd. Unfortunately, it was short-lived, as the next step that was taken was, and if the goal doesn't motivate you enough, this will. And the lizardmen start pulling people out from the crowd, individuals, randomly. And the vampire lord says, and for each day that you do not deliver these men, these criminals, to us, for each day that you do not prevent chaos and disorder in our great city, this will happen. And they kill 10 to 20 civilians. Just stab them. Right there in front of everyone. And that was the point that drove home, we have to do something now. So that was the start of the campaign, and that was me setting up just how dire things were in Waterdeep. The campaign has gone on from there. Through various means, the group has actually left Waterdeep for now. Though in character and out of character, they've expressed that they haven't given up on Waterdeep, which is great. It was definitely designed to be something that was way over their head. There is literally no conceivable way they were going to fight an ancient vampire lord, an Afridi, a fire elemental of great power, a Genasi, an elemental entity of great power. There was one other, fire giant, and an ancient red dragon. There's no way possible they were going to win that fight. So that was there to put the fear of God into them, and there to just give them a full sense of how desperate and dire things were. So going on, they've left Waterdeep, and I'm still creating towns along the way, but many of the major cities that exist in the books of the Forgotten Realms Sword Coast, I'm actually using those towns. The town my party's just gotten into is known as Thornhold. It sits on the edge of a magically induced / cursed bog known as the Mere of Dead Men. There's a really cool backstory to that. And I'm using a lot of the lore from what created this area to help inform what sort of changes I want to make to it. So this location was actually created by a lich, which is a magical entity that has used the most vile and darkest of magics to supernaturally extend their life expectancy to near infinity, with certain necessities, like siphoning souls from others. So this is what a campaign set in a pre-existing world can look like. I've taken aspects of this world, I've changed some of them, but I've used others very directly, and I've also added things, but with context to what's already actually happening. Uh, Looking for a better angle. Now the sun has moved. I've been out here this long. So that's what a existing world with some homebrew elements added to it can look like. The final campaign, which I'm only running for 5 weeks, maybe 6, is actually a book. And I actually have the book that this campaign is using right here. Curse of Strahd. This is very much so your kind of classic gothic horror story. It is about a vampire lord who didn't start out this way, who was once a noble and good man who succumbed to the forces of evil and darkness, and who sold his soul for power, and is now trapped in a land of utter darkness and despair. And I'm running this campaign, parts of this campaign, tactically speaking, for 5 or 6 friends of mine. I am stepping into the DM seat for one of the players who's normally the DM, so he can actually play in this campaign. And I've never done that before, so it's cool. And this is being done for what's known as AL, Adventures League. It is the most organized and structured version of D&D, and it is with the goal of returning D&D to a place of structure and organization that will allow for actual convention play. So when you run adventures, all the adventures played in the AL have to either be from a book or from a published module. So you cannot homebrew AL. It is the most regimented, written, explained out aspect of D&D. And it is a challenge for me because I view that as constraints. I hate the constraints when applied to a game that's about imagination. But what I will say is that it's a learning experience for me, and it's an opportunity to sort of grow my DM muscles and get better at learning how to work within the confines of structure. And it's still fun, and that is an important thing. And I actually tried to run this adventure before. I didn't enjoy it at all. This was only 6 or 7 months ago. So the fact that I've already enjoyed it more means hopefully that I'm getting better and more open and more versatile. And my goal here is to give the players a frightening experience. My goal is to sort of give them almost a heart attack. And I think that the writing in the book is very conducive to this, and that is one of the advantages of having a pre-written adventure. Maybe I lack the skills and understanding on how to deliver suspense, fright, fear, and I can say this book is written very well, and I can say that the adventure is well designed to deliver that sense of loss, despair, desolation, isolation to the characters. It's very strong in gothic horror.